Hello, Zdravo. It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome you here in this room in our session about disinformation. My name is Burak Ünveren. I'm a journalist with the International Broadcaster of Germany, Deutsche Welle, as well as a Global Diplomacy Lab member and the responsible leader of the BMW Foundation Herbert Quandt. The Global Diplomacy Lab is an innovative platform, if I may, to promote inclusive diplomacy. And about the BMW Foundation, we are going to hear some exclusive words from Mr. Thomas Leib in a minute. Excuse me. But before that, I want to thank our Slovenian colleagues for hosting us here in this beautiful town of Bled. I haven't had any time to go around, but maybe after the panel. As we approach the end of this year's Bled Strategic Forum, we are going to talk about a burning topic, disinformation and fake news, which affects all of us, regardless of our professions, regardless of the social group we belong to, regardless of the neighborhood we live in. It's a part of our lives, and it's a challenge of our time, one of the greatest challenges, and it's going to remain a challenge. We are going to shed light on three issues. We are going to take a look at the issue from three different perspectives, so to speak. In the first part, so to speak, we are going to talk about what the EU has been doing about this problem. We are going to talk about the question if it's enough what the EU has been doing. In the second part, after having talked about the state level of fight against disinformation, we are going to talk about the citizen level of fight. And we are going to talk about the question what we can do in our daily lives to tackle this problem. And in the third and the most exciting part, we are going to talk about the future of Europe. We have to have this conversation about disinformation, and we thought having this conversation here in Bled, at Bled Strategic Forum, in an international forum, because it's very much about conversation, it's very much about the future, and it's very much about strategy. And we thought the best way to have this conversation is to have it in a constructive way, in an inclusive way, and in an interactive way. That is why we want to know what you think. That's why over the course of our panel, there's not going to be a statement round and then Q&A, but we are going to ask you questions. We want to find out what you think about certain questions which we want to talk about. And we are going to give the voice to you before we ask our panelists. Before I give the word to Mr. Leib, I want to introduce our guests. Is Mr. Brookie there, by the way? Our digital guest?
Here.
Hello. I cannot see you, but I can hear you from a very innovative machine. I want to, oh, hello. Oh, okay, let's start with our digital guests. Mr. Graham Brookie, who is the director of the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab. Hello, Mr. Brookie. Thanks for joining us from the United States. We have Ms. Jutta Meier from Identity Valley, and we have Mr. Omri Preiss from Alliance for Europe. Thanks for joining us digitally. And on our panel, in these difficult times, we have three-dimensional guests. We have, first of all, Dr. Ivana Karásková, who is a European China Policy Fellow at Mercator Institute for China Studies, among other things. We also have Mr. Marjan Zabrcanec. I have worked a lot on this pronunciation. I hope I have done a good job. Who is the National Coordinator for Strategic Communications in the government of North Macedonia. And finally, we have Ms. Iryna Gumenchuk, who is a project manager at Agapedia Foundation, and who is joining us here today on the stage as a representative of the young BSF. Thanks for joining us. I want to thank all of you for being here today. And now it's time for me to give the stage to Mr. Thomas Leib so that he can talk about the BMW Foundation. Stage.
Yes, thank you very much, Burak, for handing over to me. I'm really quite impressed by the announcements you made, and I'm really excited to hear what the discussion will in the end bring about. I just want to make a very short overview of BMW Foundation Herbert Quandt. It's the first time that we are involved in the Bled Strategic Forum. Thank you to the organizers, and we're hosting this session. BMW Foundation has as its core mission inspiring responsible leadership. What does this mean? We inspire responsible leaders worldwide. We are trying to promote a trustful community of leaders on all levels, very diverse community through our programs and different formats, and we are guided by the United Nations Development Goals, the UN 2030 agenda. We have formats that take place on all continents in the world. We bring together young people in a trustful atmosphere and unique places, and we want them to collaborate for a better world, for societal change. And we have another section that deals with impact investing. We invest in social organizations that have an impact on society and also are connected with the UN Agenda 2030. Then we have a very strong community of joyful, responsible leaders that work together, that collaborate on different levels, 2,000 altogether. And we have regional chapters, we have global collaborations, and we want to interconnect them and make them all work for a brighter future and the common good. So that is the idea of BMW Foundation, and one of our responsible leaders is Burak, whom I'm handing over again the microphone now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lev. We have already lost a bit of time in the beginning, so I'm just going to proceed with our first poll. We are calling these polls because I want to, just like I said, we want to know what you think. Let's start with a warm-up question. We would like to know what you do for a living. Just feel free to say something. We don't need a microphone. I can repeat for our digital audience. What do you do? In what sector are you? What is your profession? Please. Nothing. International cooperation. We have a diplomat right here, ma'am. Oh, minority media marketing manager from Serbia. It's your diversity in yourself. I don't even have to repeat it. One more voice, maybe, please, gentlemen. Communication consultant. You're at work? You work at the British Council now. Great. Apparently, we are a very diverse group of people. Before losing time, I'm going to proceed with our second poll, but it gets a bit more serious now. Do you think if the European Union is doing enough against disinformation / for free information? Yes, no, I'm not sure. No? I'm seeing many no. No, yes. I'm seeing one yes, no. Another no. Okay, we have a significant no. We have asked, thanks for your input, we have asked the same questions to our Global Diplomacy Lab members and our Responsible Leaders Network. Let's take a look. If it's not working, it's not a problem. Let's proceed. Then I can take a seat. If it works in a minute, just let me know. It won't be too late. I want to start with Mr. Brookie, if I may see him again. But he hears me, I believe. Mr. Brookie?
Yes, we hear you.
Great. I would like to ask my first question to you. Can you please tell us about the current state of affairs with regard to the fight against disinformation in Europe and in the Transatlantic Alliance?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The current state is that we think about disinformation, first and foremost, there's a definitional issue here, right? The question of whether we're doing enough to combat disinformation or to create resilience against disinformation depends on what definitions you're using. The definitions that we use generally are, there's a big difference between misinformation, disinformation. We took the term fake news and we threw it out the window. It turns out that has a lot of connotations. It's not particularly helpful. It's been weaponized. And so misinformation, basically we all have a family member that spreads misinformation at some point. Misinformation is the unintentional spread of false information, whereas disinformation is the intentional spread of false information. And so for us, we think about this as a catalytic challenge on which every topic that it touches, it makes it harder to solve for that challenge. And so where we're at in the fight against disinformation is trying, at least based in Europe as well as the United States and in the Transatlantic Alliance, it is trying to create a way to think about this as a policy issue, as opposed to a communications issue in a comprehensive way. And until we do that, we're going to be back-footed against disinformation about things like COVID, about international relations, about things like climate change, and that's the current state of play. And so creating the comprehensive approach that includes how we deal with private industry and platform, that includes what is the role of government, that includes norms, basically what we're actually for in this space or in the fight against disinformation, because we basically know what we're against already. That's where we're at. And the folks on this panel in particular are all in that effort in a very comprehensive and collective way.
Thank you, Mr. Brookie. I want to turn our focus towards the region a little bit. Mr. Zabrcanec, can you please tell us about the efforts against disinformation in both North Macedonia and in the region?
Thank you. Thank to MFA Slovenia and CEP for organizing this important panel. We were struggling a lot in North Macedonia with disinformation. We became popular with the famous Veles case, or former Tito Veles case, in the last elections in the United States. We found labs or hubs of young people living in Veles, exporting false articles to the States. And that's how the fake news story became popular in Western Balkans, maybe in Europe. That was 5 years ago, I think so. But from that turning point till today, we are struggling with disinformation that are attacking our democratic society. We were struggling a lot in 2018 when we found a solution for the name dispute between North Macedonia and Greece during the referendum campaign. We are still struggling today when we are trying to find a solution with Bulgaria in order to deblock our European integration. We are struggling with the COVID, with the vaccination campaign. We are facing disinformation attack also with the ongoing Afghanistan situation, since we are a country and government that wants to help those people that are struggling with saving their lives, as it was in 2016 with the Syria migrants. So if we see what's a common with all these topics of disinformation, they're all radical. Their narratives are quite radical. They're either homophobic, they're either anti-vaccination, they're either against tolerance, against accepting differences. So there is a common line for all these disinformation centers that are attacking the democracy centers. And if you ask me what we did, we saw that there is a lot of damage to the society, to our vision for democratic development of the country. And today we want to share here that we created an action plan, a governmental action plan with several pillars, basic pillars that maybe when we see the points, we all know what is the action, but we put it as a document. And we asked all stakeholders, domestic, regional, international, to give us ideas to develop a further version of this action plan. So it's still a draft action plan. It's always a draft action plan, but we want it to be proactive. And today, what I want to share here, it may be a kind of a radical position that I want to ask all of you, should we defend from disinformation, or should we only defend from disinformation? My position here today is that we are too much pessimistic. All of us that we are dealing with disinformation. I think that we are stuck in the reactive mode, and I want to advocate to change the narrative. I think that we need a game change, that we have a lot of arguments, a lot of resources in our hands. We are mainstream, both governments, NGOs, media organizations, media. All of us are mainstream. And on the other side, there are unknown people, centers that are hiding behind uncertain Facebook profiles, Facebook pages. And we say that we are dealing with them, we are kind of scared, and we are living in a fear. I think that we should go proactive more instead of reactive, and that's why I'm throwing the case here that can we change the narrative? Can we speak more about promoting our story, our ideas, our values, instead of only dealing with combating, having fear from this information? I'm aware that it's not easy, especially when we speak about cybersecurity and we are speaking about ministries of defense. You cannot expect from Ministry of Defense to be proactive. They are defending from something. But I think that we can provide mutual understanding to become more proactive, to discuss about active transparency of the institutions, to promote media literacy, to do rapid response and speed fact-checking, to collaborate with the fact-checkers. We have arguments and we have paths to push for proactive position.
Thanks for this very interesting input, Mr. Zabrcanec. That's a very interesting point. I want to move to Dr. Karaskova in a minute, but I also want to share in 20 seconds my point of departure whilst designing this session a couple of months ago. It was a very similar position, or a question, to put it more diplomatically. The question in my head was, why aren't we sufficient enough to disarm these attacks beyond our borders? Why are we constantly talking about these Russian hackers, some hackers from foreign powers, hired by foreign powers, employed by foreign powers? Why aren't we in position to defend ourselves? Or maybe is disinformation unstoppable? Those were the questions which I wanted to share at this point, which brings me to my next question to Dr. Karaskova. You're the founder of MapInfluenCE, which is dedicated to the research of Chinese and Russian disinformation in Central and Eastern Europe. We all know that China exerts a certain influence in many parts of Europe. Can you please tell us about Chinese and Russian-led disinformation campaigns in Europe?
Thank you very much, Burak. It's great to be here. Thank you, organizers, for having me here. Well, that's quite some question. I think we can spend a week on that, just defining basic terms. So I will try to be, because I like the panel, how it's energetic and so on. I try to be provocative and throw some things here, normally without any introduction, without warning you and so on. So when it comes to China, we can't really talk about disinformation yet, or we are actually moving towards disinformation campaigns, but we are still mostly experiencing the propaganda stage. So what China has been putting towards Europe is mostly trying to rewrite the narrative, spreading positive information about China. China is great, it has 5,000 years of uninterrupted history, it's a great market, everybody should buy Chinese things. If you don't buy that, you can actually sell to Chinese consumers and so on. So these are the narratives which China is really good at. The problematic part, of course, started in 2019 with the Hong Kong protests, when it suddenly started to not only rewrite the discourse, but also actively spreading more information about how the world actually looks like and how we should look at it from the Chinese perspective. And then it accelerated once again during the COVID-19 crisis with the question mark over who is responsible for COVID-19, whether it was actually the US, whether it was spread by NATO, whether it actually originated in Italy, or heaven forbid, it originated in Wuhan. So that was the turning point where we started to actually look at this information coming from China. And a little bit linking it to also your very first question, is the EU doing enough? Here comes the provocative part. No, of course not. But there is a small window of opportunity which we can use, because the EU spent years and piles of money on combating Russian disinformation. Whether it's doing it successfully, well, I would leave it on you. I think there was overwhelming no, but perhaps there is someone who thinks the EU is quite effective in that and just was afraid to say so. So I will leave it to you. But there is not enough done when it comes to China. It's still seen as mostly non-problematic actor. And the usual question is, well, there is no Chinese propaganda or no Chinese disinformation because we haven't seen it. The problem is we don't look for it. And when we start looking, then it comes to be we become to be in awe, basically, to see how much there is actually spread in media, in political parties, in young leaders forum, in opposition parties, governmental parties, business, academia, you name it. So there are already avenues which China is using. It's quite good at using. So this small window of opportunity is here. It was created by COVID-19 crisis. It was created by the fact that the EU first looked at China as a problem in EU, but now we have to move forward in that.
Thanks for this very interesting input. I have a follow-up question, which is basically a questionified version of my comment from before. I have observed personally, maybe someone would agree with me, that we, in Europe at least, or in the US as well, we almost exclusively talk about Russian hackers, not Chinese ones. Why do you think that is?
That's a problem with attribution, mostly, because in most of the attacks you can't really pinpoint on where it is coming from. But we do have seen a number of cases in Central and Eastern Europe, in Lithuania, in Latvia, in Czech Republic, where actually Russia and China were named together in the reports, and we have seen also the security services naming not only Russia for the first time, but also China as the culprit of doing all these attacks. So we are moving into that era. The question is, of course, whether these two powers work in tandem or whether they work in parallel. So far, it seems that the answer is the latter, so they do work in parallel. But there are interesting examples of China starting to borrow from the Russian playbook. And that was the case, once again, with COVID-19 origin, to muddle the question of the origin the very same way how Russia is actually using and working with the information to put there many versions. So it's difficult to decide which one is the real truth and which one is some kind of version of a truth or even false information. So we do see this kind of confluence, which both sides, I think, are aware of. The Russians are aware that China is using the same avenues and is borrowing some of the techniques. China is modeling its behavior according to Russia. Luckily, we don't see them working together because that's going to be a real problem in the future.
Thanks for your comment. I want to turn to Ms. Gumenchuk at this point. Can you please tell us about the perspective of the young people? And I'm just going to ask you the first question we asked. Do you think that the EU is doing enough?
Well, if the EU will do enough, I think we will not meet here and discuss this topic. And from my side is also definitely not enough, and also from the young people's perspective, it's like for me such an honor to speak for the young people here, and thank you for the invitation. We really had fruitful discussions within 2 days on Monday and Tuesday before the Bled Strategic Forum. I think video will work lately with sound. And but I see also some more progress in communication using new, as we discussed earlier in the morning, using new technologies, using new media, and using finally some strategies for using this media, and not just a random posting because it has to be posted. But it definitely not enough because the messages are not all the messages are getting to the final audience, to, for example, to the young people, because of many factors. We can maybe also get a look on them later, but it's a really complicated job to get the right message and to put it out there in maybe online, offline, from mouth to mouth, and that this message is heard by the young people, because they are fast. Our governments, unfortunately, and the EU institutions are not that fast. Even NGOs are not that fast with information and with bringing the right message to the young people. And they are really, really fast generation that we are now experiencing. And we just have to be more like faster to get the message to them in their language. And these messages have to be understandable and have to be spoken in the language of the young people. Because if they are for, then they have to be made either with them, but also definitely for them with their language.
Thanks, Ms. Gumenchuk. Speaking of young people, I believe our video is working now. No? It doesn't matter. Let's move to our next poll, if I may. We have talked about the state level of fight against disinformation and the state of affairs in the past 20 minutes. But it's just like we have somehow pointed out, it's not always possible to prevent this problem before it reaches our borders or our computers, our homes, our living rooms, our bedrooms. So I want to turn our discussion to another level now, the citizen level of fight against disinformation. And I want to ask you, please feel free to jump in, what do you do to tackle disinformation and misinformation in your daily lives? What do you think? Do you know of any tools or? Please. I think this is going to be a longer sentence, that's why.
Yeah, I'm a journalist, and my primary job is actually debunking fake news. So that's my part of the job, dealing with fake news every day and kind of trying to provide some more information about what's propaganda, what's disinformation, and what's on the other side, fake news, like facts and truthful information. And we're actually trying to make people more media literate in that sense.
Hi, I'm a journalist too. I also have a newspaper for kids, and that's how I try to teach them to use reliable sources of information. In addition to that, I also run workshops in schools and for teachers where we teach them how to spot fake news. We use a tool called Bad News Game at the moment. We hope that we will be using also other tools. And in addition, we also created a series of videos to tackle disinformation and fake news, a term which we still use because the children are very much familiar with this term, whereas disinformation is a more complicated term to them. Thank you.
Hello, I'm a student of international relations, and I would actually like to point out the thing that hasn't been yet pointed out in the conversations that have been held till now. Actually, we have spoken of the state level of countries influencing this, using this information as a tool. But this, I think, is quite an old framework that we are using. I would say that in today's world, we should use the term interest groups, as we have seen many interest groups having a lot of influence, even so much of influence as medium or smaller countries. So this brings it to the actual, from the state level to the personal level as well, as people are using are combining into these interest groups to have the influence of countries and on others actually. And this is my argument here.
Thanks for your comment. Do we have any panelists who want to comment on this?
I think I can take it. Well, yeah, we tend to talk about states, but I would probably precise that. We tend to talk about authoritarian regimes and the regimes which are more or less hostile to the style of our lives and to values we have. So, and these are the states which come to actually undermine those values and those narratives. So that's why we focus on them. Interest groups, yes, that's a good point to basically enlarge that and just don't look at the East, if you want, to the usual suspects, and enlarge that. But interest groups usually follow the interest, and the interest rarely is subversion of this whole society, while the authoritarian states do just that. So I will see a difference here in that.
I'd like to add one thing to that digitally or virtually, if I could. And that is the way by which we think about disinformation is in three really broad categories. One, of course, is geopolitical, and that's where we would put things like foreign influence operations that include disinformation as a tactic. The second is ideological, and ideological actors could be foreign or domestic. I say this as the American on this panel. We have a lot of domestic actors right here in the United States that spread disinformation. We just had a pretty major election in which one entire side of the campaign their strategy was disinformation. It remains their strategy. We're still dealing with that here. And so until we have that moment of reflection, right, a lot of the other categories are very difficult to solve for. And the third category of disinformation that we think about a lot is disinformation for hire. Marjan had a very good example earlier, the Veles case. I would posit that a number of the Macedonian teenagers at the Veles troll farm were not necessarily ideological actors. They got paid pretty well, and they got to practice their language skills. So they were economic actors. They did that for money. And so until we deal with that incentive. Now, what I would say is that all three of those types of actors overlap. And that is an extraordinarily difficult challenge to have to deal with incentives across, right? It doesn't really matter. Here's a good way to put it. I'm not convinced that there were Russians in a WhatsApp group with a number of political actors in the United States. But if they were saying, okay, on Tuesday, we're going to launch this very specific narrative, and here are our talking points, and here's what we're going to go do. That said, if they're amplifying the same messages, then the impact on the audience is the same, right? The way that we're interacting with that on platforms or in the information environment itself is the same. And that's the challenge here. But in order to solve any of that challenge, we need to be extraordinarily careful about which part of the challenge we're trying to solve for. And so not conflating things like foreign influence, which would include things like Russian covert information operations, which exist at scale. They're very good at that. Or the elements of influence from China, right? China's perceptions of their discourse power is what they call it in their own papers, right? We have to be able to solve for that. But until we also have this reflection domestically in all of our countries, it'll be a lot harder to do.
Thanks, Mr. Brookie. I appreciate that you have... Can you hear me with the microphone? Yeah. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, but we had a... You wanted to say something, right? Please.
Yeah, also as a follow-up for what the discussion was about, I believe one of the other problems is that coming from the Balkans, and we had two very interesting panels yesterday, and the problem is that we constantly see China and Russia, but I do believe also with the two previous speakers, we also have domestic real issue. Like we have our own political party, which they are using disinformation as a tool, and they are training their people to actually behave on the footpath of disinformation. This is how they are running their political campaigns. And when you see this from the perspective of ordinary citizen, which you don't have that much to apply and to apply to what is disinformation, how do I challenge the one from the other, to your mindset, it's all the same pretty much. So the problem is that before we go to China and Russia, which we should, for mostly, I mean, we should do that. The problem is that we should also start tackling something from our own neighborhood. I mean, Mr. Brookie rightfully said, we just had what we had in the US, and we saw what happened there. We are seeing, witnessing, and living what is happening in the Balkans, what is happening in Italy, what is happening with the vaccine, and no vax campaigns throughout all the world. So the problem is that maybe we are, one of the things why we are not as efficient in tackling the disinformation issue that comes from Russia and China is because we are not efficient to tackle it domestically. And people see this as, you know, of course for ordinary citizens, China and Russia is too far-fetched for them to actually have a mindset to think about that, while we have it in our ordinary lives. So that is also another perspective which I think we should bring it on the table. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment.
Is it possible maybe to say something?
Please, Omri.
Yeah. So it's a really interesting discussion. I think we have our finger on a lot of really important points here. I think Graham just a minute ago gave a very good analysis and a mapping of the different concepts, you know, that we have to be aware of. The thing is that as we're talking about, this is one continuing phenomena, and we have to zoom out also and see the larger picture of authoritarian actors that are trying to undermine liberal democracy as we know it for a variety of political and also economic interests. So the disinformation playbook also comes together usually with a playbook for undermining the rule of law, undermining democratic processes, putting human rights defenders and dissidents at risk, and so on and so forth. And these people across these different geopolitical spaces around the world do learn from each other a great deal and do coordinate a great deal. And what we need to be able to do is see that what is happening in the Balkans is connected with what is happening in Russia, so that a citizen in the Balkans might have no idea that what they're seeing on the news is a narrative that originated from Russia or maybe was tried out in Turkey and then went somewhere else. But these interconnections really enable this playbook against democracy to be very, very effective. And on the other hand, the response by pro-democratic actors is incredibly fragmented. So that, you know, there's a lot of different networks, think tanks, civil society organizations, political parties, startups, you name it. But we're all operating in a fragmented space where what we really need to do is to be able to connect more effectively. And as some people in the room already said, we need to generate our own narrative for why evidence-based communications and why evidence-based information is better, why democracy is a better system, why people will have a better life if their human rights are protected. This is the real challenge. So it's not about going out there and fact-checking separately every single piece of information that is out there in the space. It's about how do we come together and create a louder narrative. But let's talk about that some more as we go.
Thanks for your comments. I think Mr. Zabrcanec wants to add something to that.
He put back my position at the air. Thank you for that. I will quote Secretary Blinken. He was trying to reframe even how NATO is positioned and presented itself as an organization. At the last NATO summit, he said that NATO is not or doesn't want to be recognized for what it's against, but according to what is for what. Meaning that even NATO, which is a defensive organization, wants to be recognized according to for which values they are promoting instead of according to against they are fighting for. I'm totally agree with the position of the previous speaker. We need to find just a few points that are common for our values, and to I say it's 4P. We need to provide information, produce, publish, and promote, and that's active transparency. NGOs, organizations, citizens should push the governments to become more transparent, to publish information, facts, and we as a governments, we should become more and more proactively transparent, because there will be, on that way, there will be a lot of data published on our websites, on the internet, on Google, and it will be easier for the citizens to find the other information, to compare facts, to see the difference between facts and false information. If we expose ourselves, if we publish documents, if we provide as much as possible information publicly as active transparency, it will be much harder for the enemies to dominate.
I want to take this very interesting comment, and I want to turn to Ms. Meier, who is our data specialist here. What's your take on this, Jutta?
Well, thank you so much. I was just taking notes and thinking, wow, thank you so much for all these statements. Yeah, I'm actually not a data scientist or so, but I do work in digital technologies since more than 12 years. Since the first iPhone came up, I changed my focus on all these digital technologies. And I do think everything Graham and Omri and everyone's already said, we urgently need a positive narrative and a framework and some orientation. So we do live in a digital space right now. Everything here is happening with such a high speed online that we need to have a better understanding of the digital space. I think so, because everyone is compromised, everyone is taking part. So I do think we need like digital literacy that is understandable, so that someone said that they are working with children. So working with children and executives is kind of the same. We need to have simple language. I think it's really, really important to have a positive, easy, understandable framework in the digital space. And this is what we are working on. We are convinced that it's all about us, to take care of our identity and of our values in the digital world. And this is why we created something that's called the Digital Responsibility Goals. And everyone here knows about the Sustainable Development Goals. This is focused, of course, on sustainability and a very well-established framework that helps us to move into a more sustainable world. And we do think there's a huge gap in the digital space, so there's not a framework like this, and this is what we want to close. So we brought up the Digital Responsibility Goals and just presented that in the European Parliament together with Omri and the Alliance for Europe a few weeks ago. And we are working on bringing these 7 goals into the world, because we think there are some topics we need to understand in order to know whom we may be able to trust. And we do think we need to know who acts responsibly in the digital world, so we can trust and then create a better world through that, because we can trust in something we see online. And these are my sense on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jutta. By the way, it's just a mixture of first and last names. I mean, you can call me Burak, and I'm going to call you whatever comes to my tongue. Iryna wants to comment on that.
Thank you, Burak. I really want to add also almost to every statement, but because of shortage of time, I'll just say that young people spend a lot of time online. So we had some current numbers, or like actual numbers from young BSF, and there were like more, like 3 hours and more, like per day, and it's a lot. And just for some numbers, there is a really many tools already developed on the, I think, European level, and also in the world, like factcheck.org or fakenews.org, and you can really check the fake news there or the disinformation there. So there are tools, just those who look, they find. And I do agree with the comment about we call it kind of like internal enemies. Like, I'm originally from Ukraine, and I was there when Maidan happened, and I did confrontate it a little bit with the disinformation, but we mostly put it out of the country. So we said it's those who have the strategies against the country. It's truth, but we don't know those who are disinformating us inside of the country. And this is like, they are also our, I think, more like worse enemies than those who we do know. And we can develop some strategies against them. And what I wanted to say again, the education and the information is really important, but we'll have the question later, what do we need to do against disinformation and everything, but I am trying just to encourage people and young people also to take this responsibility and do check the information and to be proactive, because this starts with every individual. And we do say that if the question is who is fact-checking every day, nobody does, but this is where we need to cooperate with others, because we do need this individual level, but we also need the strategic and systemic approach, fighting this, and not just fighting, but I like more preventing this from happening. This is bad because we do act reactive, and this is, I think, most problem of the European Union. And usually the bad guys have more money, but I don't think that European Union or Europe itself has less money than the bad guys. They do just need more to invest in these tools, in the development, in cooperation, in empowering people, in education to cope with these issues.
Amen. Ivana.
Well, I have three very short, hopefully short inputs to that. Trying to synergize it a little bit here. I think the problem is that we are trying to find a silver bullet which will solve everything, and we have to accept that the society is fragmented, and also the response probably is going to be, for time being, fragmented. So we do have fact checkers, we have mythbusters, we have educators, we have people working on strategic communication, and so on. So, and we need them, and we will probably need them in the future as well. So I would probably not call for streamlining and saying that here we have to find a perfect solution. And we will also have to accept that we are not going to educate, or we are not going to reach everyone. There are people who just want to believe that, and that's their right to believe that. And there are people who just, oh, here I'm going to be super controversial. There are just people who, because the IQ is not distributed evenly in the society, will just not get it. And that's their right too, not to get it. So I think that not wasting time on creating a perfect solution for 100% of society is probably a good thing to realize right now, that this is not going to happen, that there is always going to be some kind of short deficiency. As for the localization of the propaganda and disinformation, that's a huge problem also when it comes to China, that Chinese propaganda so far is quite easily detected because of, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, because of the difficulties with our languages, because of non-proficient speakers on the Chinese side. So still, if it's a sloppy message, then you can attribute it quite easily to the actor which is spreading that. Unlike Russia, which spent decades actually learning us and knowing us and knowing the history and having ties here, China is a newcomer to the region. So they tried and test, and sometimes it's quite visible where the message is coming from. Where the problem starts is when it's localized, when it's picked up by the local elites, and then when it's spread in local languages through local channels, it's more difficult to attribute it to the propaganda spreader, and it's also much more difficult to fight. And last comment, not to be so pessimistic, and also put some hope there, I would like to remind everyone, because I think that you were aware of that the EU is actually moving towards doing something quite actively. And I'm thinking about Serbia in the case of vaccine diplomacy. President Vučić devotedly kissing Chinese flag and saying that China is the only friend Serbia has in the region. and then the EU started with the massive campaigns showing the posters and spreading how much money it actually spent in Serbia for a number of years to upgrade the healthcare system. So that was quite an interesting example to see that EU, which has some shortcomings in the past when it comes to strategic communication, actually got the act right in Serbia during the vaccine diplomacy. Whether it worked, that's quite another question. But at least there was a response.
Thanks. I don't want. We're in a great flow right now, and I don't want to destroy it just because of my plan. Feel free to jump in. Does anyone want to comment on that, please?
Hi, I'm Agron Bayrami. I'm editor of a newspaper in Kosovo, and my fear as editor is that we might be misleading a bit ourselves when we think in terms of us and them. Because in my experience, in most of the cases, we are dealing with ourselves. Part of our media landscape, parts of our governments, parts of our political parties and institutions are the ones who produce the disinformation intentionally and disseminate it intentionally. Parts of European Union or member states of European Union, we were yesterday, we were listening to the panels, and there were a lot of question marks over some statements there. They are intentionally doing that. So, you know, to think that it is us, Luke Skywalkers, fighting the Darth Vaders on the other side is misleading, and we are maybe going to do something about the Russians and Chinese, but we are going to fail in addressing the problem at home. And this is my fear as editor, because I see it in everyday work. In everyday work, I need to try to defend us from being framed by political parties, even leaders speaking publicly, like Mr. Vučić. He was not unaware about EU's assistance. He just chose to say that it doesn't exist. And how do you fight that? I mean, this is the point. Thank you.
Can I, do you think disinformation has a straight correlation towards the decay of democracy and the rule of law in the Western Hemisphere?
Yes, from my side.
I think Mr. Brookie is saying yes very deeply from the United States.
Or
I think
that
Omri,
that was Omri, sorry. Please, Omri, if you want to comment on this.
Well, I mean, the disinformation as a word, I sometimes mention this in this discussion. It's just interesting to remember the history. It's a term that was coined by Stalin in order to define the Soviet Union strategy of essentially putting out their false information to promote Soviet interests. And so, yeah, I think there is a strong relationship between this approach of essentially turning politics into theater. Things seem to have gone dark. I hope that's intentionally over there. But there is a big correlation, a strong correlation between turning politics into theater and then undermining democracy. You can't have a democracy if you can't agree on what is real, what is fact, what is fiction. You need to have some kind of common understanding in the public sphere in order to take decisions together. And nationalists, fascists, anti-democrats, since the rise of fascism and even before, even in the age of the Roman Republic, understood that once you create theater, you take away this ability to make decisions together, and you just have to follow the great leader, whoever is leading the show. And so you see this very clearly with Mussolini, you see it very clearly with Hitler, and you see it very clearly also in the age of Putin and Trump. And I'm not, drawing direct, of it. I don't want to get into the kind of comparisons that people always get into. But I think we do need to recognize that there is a sort of neo-fascism, and that I think people walking around Capitol Hill with swastikas really, is as strong a line as you could ever draw. The line is there. we need to recognize that these techniques are not necessarily new, but the delivery methods are that much more sophisticated. The platforms are that much more sophisticated. And that's why this appears to be new. I would really want to direct people to the work of Timothy Snyder, the historian of this. His book on The Road to Unfreedom is really very powerful in the understanding of this. And I think what we need to do as pro-democrats, I would say, is sort of expand that space for common decision-making, for sense-making. And what Alliance for Europe is trying to do is essentially build up this bigger social coalition, whether it's civil society and business and the arts and culture sphere, the media sphere, to build a coalition that is able to essentially get the message of democracy and democratic decision-making out there. And for that, we need to establish some common language, common approaches to things.
I would just add to that, to the question of whether disinformation is a threat to democracy or society as we know, yes, the answer is directly yes. And to build on Omri's thoughts, which I fully endorse and agree with, right? Democracy is based on self-determination. And self-determination is based on a shared set of facts, right? A bunch of people that at least agree that like the facts of decisions, even if they disagree on those decisions, that's the entire ballgame here. And right now, disinformation erodes all of that. So democracy depends on a shared set of facts. Disinformation tears away that shared set of facts. And until we solve for that, we're going to be dealing with that across every single issue. In the United States right now, we're dealing with voting rights. We're dealing with COVID misinformation, vaccination, all of the climate change, right? The fact that there's even a debate that those things exist, or a debate about what people are doing to do things like take away voting rights from citizens, that's not only crazy, but that's a problem. That's an existential problem for democracy. And until we have this debate about, hey, what are we going to do? The editor that just asked the question from the audience, what do we do? It's a pretty basic strategy. We're going to have to call a thing and not be afraid to call it what it is, which is disinformation or specific actors who are spreading it, fascists, neo-fascists, right? Like in the United States, we're dealing with a large racism problem, right? Call a thing. Be direct about it. The facts are on your side, and if the facts are on your side, then you're protected. I understand that doesn't work in discrete, right, for a lot of dissidents, for a lot of civil society, a lot of the countries that we work with in the DFR lab. But until we can build up to call a thing, again, we're going to be back-footed against this entire issue set.
That's a great point. Mr. Zabrcanec wants to say something, but I want to ask a follow-up question to Graham. We have known each other for 45 minutes. I think I can call you Graham, right? I want to turn our focus to social media in the context of what you have just said. Some social media giants, of course I'm talking about Twitter and Facebook, they have introduced certain measures after the US democracy was attacked in the Congress. I'm going to ask the question very directly, not in an academic way. Do you think that banning Donald Trump on Twitter is an efficient measure against fake news, disinformation, and misinformation?
The question is whether deplatforming works. And the answer is that deplatforming as a tactic does work. That said, deplatforming is not a strategy. Right, so in the context, in the example that you just mentioned, January 6th, not only Donald Trump, but a number of the folks that were in front of the Capitol, a number of the insurrectionists, again, using the strategy of calling a thing, insurrectionists in front of the Capitol, a number of them were removed from platforms, and not only Facebook and Twitter, to an extent YouTube. A number of the sites, the websites, were taken off of platforming services. And so, yeah, deplatforming works. We monitor extremism activity here in the United States, and what we saw after deplatforming was a very large scramble that made it very difficult for those groups to coordinate, and they were attempting to coordinate. especially unlawful militia groups here in the United States. And so deplatforming does work. That said, in free and open societies, that's not a long-term or sustainable strategy. It fit a means, or it met a mean, or it was a means to an end. It was effective in stopping the amplification specifically of certain types of disinformation that stop the steal narrative specifically. But again, it's not, you know, for a year or two down the line, that's not an effective strategy. Permanent deplatforming could be an effective strategy. Some platforms have made decisions about Donald Trump, and those decisions are debatable, but at least they are decisions on which we can debate. And we're going to have a larger conversation about deplatforming as a strategy. That said, right, here it comes back to what we're actually for, as opposed to just saying what we're against, which deplatforming is a way to say what we're against, or for platforms to say what are not allowed on their platforms. Saying what you're for, saying that speech doesn't necessarily mean free reach on your platform, or that your right to say whatever you want can't. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes. Can you hear us? No? Let's proceed. Okay, Mr. Zabrcanec, then we're going to have a
Sorry
question.
about that. We've had some connectivity issues at the Atlantic Council, apparently.
Please.
I totally agree that the deplatforming cannot be a strategy. It's a crisis tool that it's a reactive crisis tool in a situation of emergency, and it means that also debanking cannot be a strategy. It can be only a tool in a strategy, but it cannot provide any success if there is no strategy, meaning if there are not proactive tools like active transparency, like media literacy, like digital literacy, it was mentioned, working with kids and children. On the comment from the editor from Kosovo, you're right. It's not us and them in terms of countries and nations. It's us and them in terms of those who are defending, promoting democracy, and those who are attacking democracy. And there are, in each of our groups, stakeholders, societies, institutions, there are representatives of them. Those who attack intentionally, who want to destroy each democratic point of institution or part of society. The US Capitol Hill was mentioned as a typical representation of force of those who are against democracy. We saw the same and even worse in North Macedonia in April 2017. The same model. Radicals against democracy entering the Macedonian parliament, trying to stop electing the new democratic government. Our current prime minister there was intention to be killed. You all remember those photos of Zoran Zaev with blood on his head. Those who attacked him are the same who are spreading disinformation, clicking and multiplying clicks, and those who even believe in those disinformation. So it's us and them.
We are going to move to our last part and start talking about future of Europe. But before that, we have two comments.
Thank you. Katja Gershak, Center for European Perspective. Hi, Burak, nice to meet you. Hi. Finally, right. I just wanted to comment how interesting it is. We're getting into a part of the discussion that's much, much broader than disinformation. And I'm happy that we are. And like Ivana, I'm going to go out there and be heretical in certain statements and how we actually have to look at the core of democracy now. If we, like Graham said, cannot agree on facts, and the fact that then we have politicians in a democratic world that are a reflection of voters. It's democracy. We vote these people in. And then what kind of standards do we have for our politicians and our leadership, right? And then we have politicians that are intentionally being divisive. That is extremely sad and worrisome for the state of our democracies. And I think that there's been a decade of a debate that just didn't happen, and the heretical part comes now. How was the voting in our system done? I mean, really, one person, one vote, that's the heresy. You don't want to touch that, but really, who gets to decide what type of leadership we have? That I'm really saddened at the fact that I'm saying this. And then we have to look at the roots of our education system, right? How do we end up with leadership like this? I think disinformation is the core, but also just the top layer, the symptom of something much broader and deeper. Of course, we have lack of trust if that's the leadership we have, if the institutions cannot agree on facts. We have to take a look in the mirror. And what I'm saying may not be the right answer, but at least we have to be willing to talk about it at some point as democratic societies. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Katja. One more comment, and then we are going to watch our video. And
I'm Lejla Bečakčić. I come from Center for Investigative Reporting in Bosnia. If anybody know how divisive disinformation can be, we on the Balkans know how the disinformation campaign have actually turned this whole region into the bloody war in the 90s, and what have happened ever since. We know we are actually seeing an effect of a very strong campaign that was led by media, but at the background of all of this was politics, and the background of all of this was actually money. So my comment is that we are talking about ideologies here: fascists, neo-fascists, democracy versus autocracy, this and that. It's all about the money, because the control that is being that is actually attempted to be imposed by the authoritarian regimes is all about the money. That they are controlling the natural resources. They are trying to have access to the wider region, to the wider market, and it's basically what we need. The fighting disinformation by fact-checked information is not going to work. I agree, it's a mechanism, and we need a mechanism, but it's not going to solve the problem, because your example with the vaccines diplomacy is basically exactly how the disinformation is actually more effective, because they are juggling with the emotions. And once you prove that that is not right information, they're already somewhere else juggling with the emotions. So it's not going to work effectively, because there will be more people who are trusting emotional disinformation versus not so emotional facts, because facts are never emotional. So we need to follow the money to see exactly where are the influences and connect the dots to see the intention of those who are using disinformation as one of the mechanisms to impose their power. And that's what we kind of missed in this equation of trying to deal with all kinds of very ineffective strategies, I would say, to fight disinformation. My problem with the EU approach to fight disinformation, and it's always the enemy that is presented in one particular group of people, which at least in the Balkans is not. Because the Balkans is not that, while the EU spent tons of money and ages fighting disinformation that's coming from Russia, in the Balkans that was not the case. The Russia was a known enemy, but we actually suffered more from unknown or unrecognized enemies. We are still having the same issues. We have Turkey, we have Middle East, we have a combination of Russian and Chinese, but basically we also have the influence from the West, which is also could be disinformational in a sense. So let's go back to the basically look at the streams of money that are being covered by the emotional disinformation and by the territorial dominance wars that are actually kind of running this whole campaign. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. There have been great points made, a very diverse spectrum of opinions we have heard. Now I want to move to our last part, in which we can talk about these problems in a constructive way, if I may. I want to ask you my last question. I want to change my last question. I just want to give you the microphone and ask you, what do you think the EU should do differently with regard to this fight in the future? What would be your recommendations? Really? with regard to this, whatever we have talked about, everything. Please, but if I would like to give the priority to the audience. For those who are watching us online, it was an inside joke for the forum. That's why I'm not repeating it. Okay, if there's no one, I think we can hear Iryna, and then Ivana.
So we can be really radical, just turn off internet, go back to the paperwork, and then the information will go slower. But Germany will be the leader there, because Germany still sends so many letters, and the call information flows are offline. So Germany
Fax
will be
machines.
Just kidding. I think there were really many good issues and points brought up here, and the topic is really important. And it is despite the fact that it's not a new topic, but we are still talking about it. It's still an issue, and it's still a problem, and we still have to find a constructive way how to deal with it. And I do want to maybe appeal a little bit to the preventive measures, not for reactive measures, but anyway to make the good strategies, because this is what we saw right now in Europe is not the strategy. So many people are really doubting whether there is a strategy behind the communication which is happening. So the systemic and strategic approach is really important at the European level. This is like my bullet point that I mentioned, and I do want to appeal to the individual responsibility, because at the very end we are those who are spreading also information. Maybe unintentionally, maybe it was misinformation or the disinformation, but we do that. And my insight from the work with young people also sometimes, some of them are really lazy. I'm sorry, I have to say that. Really lazy to check the information, not just the young people, but also many different age groups. It's much easier to hear to the sister, brother, neighbor, and then make your own decision on those opinions, but not the fact check. It's not, will agree with you, it will not, it's a technique, it will not solve the core of the problem, but at least we will be, this individual responsibility in the COVID time is really showed how often we wear a mask, how often we wash hands, how we do take this citizen responsibility for the common good, and then spreading that. And the positive narrative, this is the third point. The positive narratives, including these positive narratives into the strategy that we have to spread our own information in the positive way, communicating the achievements, communicating the goals of the EU, communicating the numbers are not sexy, but communicating the numbers, we can also kind of spread the positive vibes and not just criticizing others or reacting to the other bad, negative messages. That would be mine.
Thanks, Iryna. Ivana, please.
Just before I start responding to what you ask, I would like to respond to Katja just in two sentences, because I don't want this to be hanging around here without answering that. I think the problem is that there is a huge divide between elites and the rest. And we have to ask ourselves as elites, because you, like it or not, you are here, you are the elite. So what we did wrong not to include the rest to the system, and why they feel so angered, and why they feel so disillusioned with the West, why they feel disillusioned with the European Union, why they feel disillusioned with the value system, with the education system, basically with everything. So that's our responsibility to do that. And nobody else will do that. And if we don't do that, then we can't blame Russia, China, and others to abuse the loopholes we actually created and the gaps we have in our societies. And as for turn towards something positive, so what could be actually done here? I think that the first point would be to protect media, because media are the spreaders of information. They are actually strategic industry, though there are people, enlightened people in the government who knows that, but there are also others who basically think that strategic industries are airlines, nuclear power plants, and so on. But strategic industry is actually media, because if you let other countries, especially countries which may not have good intentions, to own media in your own country, before you know that, you may have elections, and the result of the elections may not be something you would like to proceed. You would like to see, actually, and that's something which travels really fast and which has immediate effect on society and on their voting patterns and so on. So protection of media is absolutely crucial. So, and here comes the positive part. I'm really glad that EU made the put media into strategic industries for the EU investment screening law. So any country, any investor from a third country who wants to invest in media sector now have to, it can't be blocked, but at least the European Commission would know that because there is this information sharing system. And then there is a pressure on the governments to actually implement this legislation into national legislation, and that will prevent, that actually gives power to the government to block the investment into media if it is seen as strategically unwise to do that. So protection of media is the first point. Second, more research is needed, definitely. In my area, which is China, so I don't impose on Russia because I know nothing about that, or almost next to nothing about Russia. The usual response in Central and Eastern Europe is that there is no propaganda because we haven't seen that. Well, if there is no research, you would not see that. I'm willing to bet over a bottle of good Slovenian wine that if you do a basic research, you would find that. So, and the last but not least, a very practical thing, if someone from the European Commission and European Parliament is listening, increase the budget of Stratcom. East Stratcom, which deals with disinformation, and have more places for China analysts. So not focus just on Russia, but also on China.
Thank you, Ivana. I want to know what Omri and Jutta think about, please, I'm gonna show the video, yeah. But before that, let's finally watch our video, which is not too late for, by the way. You'll see.
It is rather complicated to assess if the EU is doing enough to fight against disinformation in Europe. However, it seems more could be done when it comes to preventive measures. And of course, each and every one of us could help a lot.
The European Union started to act against disinformation too late. Disinformation is changing attitudes of people, the way how they are voting and how we perceive our future. We need a long-term strategy to act against disinformation, and we need to change the way how we are communicating so people are aware of this huge problem.
I feel disinformation is something we need to tackle as society as a whole, not just the institutions or the government. The first way of doing so is to involve citizens far more and far more regularly in policy making, including on the technical topics of policy making like climate change. Having that habit of reviewing factual information and having to come to a balanced opinion about it needs to be instilled far more across the whole of society, not just the political or the civil servant class. Secondly, I feel strongly we ought to invest far more in investigative journalism. Journalism and providing good information and having good information valued for what it is ultimately the best way to tackle this information. And across all of that, I feel the EU is doing much already, but could do more and could certainly set a global example for what it looks like to involve citizens day to day in policy making in the most intricate, complex items and to set a standard for journalism for the 21st century.
The fact that I cannot particularly answer those questions very specifically and very directly means that the EU is not doing enough to share with non-EU partners or non-EU geographies what they are actually doing in order for free information and in order for disinformation to not take root. Knowing what the EU is doing as an American, half American, would be really, really powerful and would enable us in the United States to model behavior, to advocate and promote and support what the EU is doing. And also, it would be a really powerful ways for us to reflect and to use what is already being done in the EU to shape policy somewhere else.
Yeah, it's back. I have just given Jutta and Omri some false hope because our last member talked about non-EU members in Europe. That's why I want to turn to Mr. Zabrcanec. What do you think? How do you think the EU can support the region more, the EU candidates or non-candidates, European countries which are not EU members?
Well, if I take the example of North Macedonia and our draft action plan for dealing with disinformation, EU already helped us, not directly, but it helped us because we used the documents, the strategies, the intention of the Union to deal with disinformation as an argument that the government has the right and the obligation to start either leading or be an active participant in combating disinformation, because we are still kind of struggling in North Macedonia to convince some of the media organizations that we have the right and the obligation to do that. There are still very credible media organizations that think that it's risky if a government is dealing with disinformation. They think that we are going to be those who will say what is true, what is false. That's not a case. And we are saying directly to them, look, if European Union, a union of states, is providing official strategy, official process, why this government here in North Macedonia should not do anything? I think that this debate is very important, especially in North Macedonia, because we should not throw out any interesting group or stakeholder. We should take all interested participants on our boat and find a way to do something together. On the question, what should EU do? If we take the example of Serbia, maybe they should invest more in the health system, and they should promote more, not to wait President Vučić to speak about China to promote their success.
Thank you for your comments. I want to turn to Jutta and Omri at this point. You are both leaders of, you're shaping the future of Europe with your very promising and successful civil society initiatives. I would like to ask you your opinion about the potential contribution of the civil society to this fight, to this prevention. How do you think the civil society can secure free information and push back fake news and disinformation? Jutta.
Thanks so much.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks so much, Burak, for that question. I do think we need some independent platforms, because those platforms who are currently providing all these informations are following a different purpose.
Jutta?
Sorry, I think there's a huge delay in the video. I'm sorry.
So too. What is that?
Omri, will you give it a try? I'm not sure if I'm someone.
I can try it. Let's see. So far, I'm not hearing any delay.
Oh.
Okay. I believe the same problems Graham is experiencing too. Graham, can you hear us in real time? You're gonna hear this question in the future. Okay. Yeah, that's the downside of...
Flying.
I'm gonna throw a message into the future. Graham, Jutta, and Omri. When you hear this message,
yeah,
please keep talking. We are gonna shut up.
We can hear you in real time. It just seems we have a delay.
That's the joke. Until then, okay.
Okay, so I'm just going to try and speak for a while, and my voice will a few seconds later, I guess. I think there is a question of how closely you zoom in tackling disinformation and what the EU can do, and then zooming out to the bigger picture. Essentially, what we're trying to do is, as Alliance for Europe, also with some of the good people at the Atlantic Council and other partners, we're trying to create a common language and a common set of tools by which civil society organizations, campaigners, and just ordinary citizens can understand what's happening in the digital space, can identify disinformation, and then can respond effectively. There is a system called the AMIT framework, developed by some intelligence experts that have been, around the transatlantic ecosystem of experts that are working on this, and a few other very interesting sets of tools that would allow people to understand better what's happening in the digital space, and then classifying what they're seeing and then being able to respond. Right now, a lot of the tools that are available are either corporate tools that are very expensive or very sophisticated tools that you have to be an expert to be able to use. And what we want to do is really make it more accessible and more available. And I think what the European Union should do is enable a lot more of this cooperation and collaboration across civil society. That's sort of the instantaneous thing that could be done. Then the other long-term solution that a lot of people here alluded to is education. You need to invest in media literacy, digital citizenship, enabling people to understand what it means to be a digital citizen, not just, can you please fact check this or that, but really, what is my role in a democracy? How does a democracy really work? And how do I do it online? So those are all important elements. And there was a joke earlier about Germany, and I spent a lot of time doing German admin on paper. It is funny, it is a joke, but it also isn't. We really need to invest in our digital future in Europe. We need to decide whether we want to be dominated by Chinese public infrastructure coming our way through Belt and Road, Russian authoritarian disinformation, and big American monopolizing platforms, corporations, or do we want to create some kind of alternative that is based on democratic values and can really reflect the values of rule of law, human rights, and all of these things that we want to live by. Now, I'm not saying that we should somehow fragment the internet. We do need to have a global interconnected internet, but we need, as a European Union, as an actor that stands for these values, we really need to stamp our footprint and say, this is the kind of world that we want to live in. And our fellow Democrats around the world, not in a partisan sense, but people who like democracy, they will agree with European Democrats who want the same thing. So I think the European Union and civil society that operates here, and I think here Jutta's work is incredibly important, we need to incentivize these corporations to really change their business model so that we're not trapped in this surveillance society and disinformation society, and we need to change it for them through smart regulation if they don't want to change. And we need to set some standards, and then we need to have a conversation across the democratic world about what kind of investment is needed in the long run and what kind of civic engagement is needed in the long run to solve these problems. I just to end on an optimistic note, I really think if we invest the resources and if we do the work, we really can create a much, much healthier and better and more pleasant even digital space that we can all inhabit.
In the chat.
Sorry if that took a while.
I don't know what the delay is, but we need to leave the room in 5 minutes. That's why if Jutta, Graham, if you're hearing me, I'm going to kindly ask you to keep it brief.
Yes, I'll give it a try. I totally agree with everything, of course, Omri says. And I just want to catch up on this because someone said we need to follow the money. I don't think so. I think we need to steer the money into the right direction. As it's happening with sustainable development, it needs to happen with digital responsibility. And I think we are onto that. We are here. It's super important to bring together responsible leaders. I'm very happy to be part of the BMW Foundation network, which creates get-togethers like this. And I think that's very important. And it's on us. Exactly, someone said it's not them or us, it's on us. We have to do that together, and happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we'll just briefly add if volume allows. Thank you for having this conversation. I think this conversation is part of what we do first. In terms of next steps, I don't think that we have a choice but to do all of them, right? When we talk about all of these discrete things of, how are we going to engage with the social media platforms and private industry? How are we going to engage with governments? How are we going to talk to our citizens about this, or our friends, families, and neighbors, right? We got to start doing all of it, all at once. And not all of that is a silver bullet, right? It was said earlier in this conversation that there is no silver bullet. I fully agree with that. And so we got to chip away at it. And we got to chip away at it wherever we possibly can. And that's progress. We're not going to eradicate disinformation. It's not possible. But where we can have a huge amount of impact is building more resilience. And if we don't start to do a little bit of that in each one of these areas, whether that's policy solutions or how we talk about this or how we think about this, research it, things like that, how we build broader communities of practice around this set of issues, all of those things. We got to do all of it. And so I'm very much looking forward to working with all of you to do that. And I think we got our work cut out for us.
Thank you, Graham. We have a voice from the audience. I don't want to wrap up with the panelists, but the audience, please, 30 seconds.
30 seconds, okay. Okay, I believe that the main pillars where the EU should invest, it's not only the freedom of media or increase the investigative or fact-checking or professional media, but also invest in education system and in health system. I believe that in all our countries, the budget of in these three pillars is lower, and we are talking about media literacy, but the education, the system of education or the budget in our country is lower, not for 5 years, but I believe for 20 years, and also in the health system. And I want to say another thing, all the countries in the Balkan or our governments has a good mechanism of spreading the disinformation, propaganda, or controlling the information. And they have invested a lot of money in people, a lot of money in mechanism, and also a lot of money in media that spread their information. So the question is to find a small or let's say a simple strategy for us that they could share, improve, and build on this. Thank you.
Thanks for all your comments. Thanks for joining. Viele Grüße nach Rheinland-Pfalz to the United States. I don't know where you live, Omri. Anybody in Bled? I'm so sorry. There are more members in the audience who wanted to say something, but we don't have time. Thank you. 15 more seconds. I want to refer to what Graham said before. We need to agree on facts. That's the basis of a healthy society. Post-truth might be attractive, but truth is still the truth. Thank you, and see you outside. Mic drop.
Take us off.